Good afternoon.
Hi everyone, good evening. Welcome to our panel discussion on third-party politics and the press. My name is Devin, like you said, and I'm the president of TU Student Chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. And on behalf of our student group, I want to thank you all so much for coming out tonight. And I also want to thank the Maryland Pro Chapter of SPJ for making this event possible. And I'd like to introduce Miss Louise Harris, who'd like to say just a couple quick words about SPJ.
Hi, I'm Louise Harris I'm Secretary-Treasurer of the Maryland Pro Chapter, and I want to thank the pros that are here to network with the students, because one of our goals this year is to get involved with student groups. We have an event coming up with Salisbury University, and we're also going to plan one with University of Maryland, because we want to network with the students and try to get them to understand what happens in the real world, and it's necessary. The other thing I want to say is I have an attendance sheet going around the room. If you are from the Pro Chapter, or if you are a guest and not from the Student Chapter, please sign that attendance sheet, because I need to report it to the regional director. So, thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to introduce our honorable guests and panelists tonight. We have Kevin Zeese, who is an attorney who has been a political activist since graduating from George Washington Law School in 1980. He works on peace, economic justice, criminal law reform, and reviving American democracy. He has been active in independent and third-party political campaigns, including for state legislative offices in Maryland, Governor of California, and U.S. President, where he served as press secretary and spokesperson for Ralph Nader in 2004. He ran for the U.S. Senate in 2006 and was the only person ever nominated by the Green Party, Libertarian Party, and Populist Party. Welcome, Kevin Zeese. We also have Charles Mathesian. He's Politico's national politics editor. Prior to joining Politico, he spent 5 years as the editor of National Journal's Almanac of American Politics, the biennial book often referred to as the Bible of American politics. He spent 8 years as a national correspondent for Governing Magazine, where he covered state legislatures, governors, and urban politics. Mathesian has also served as an election night analyst for National Public Radio and appeared on numerous radio and television programs, including NPR's All Things Considered, MSNBC's Hardball with Chris Matthews, and on Fox News, C-SPAN, CNN, and BBC. He earned his bachelor's degree in politics from Catholic University in Washington, D.C., and his J.D. from American University. Alexis Simendinger has been a reporter in the Capitol since 1986. She joined Real Clear Politics as White House correspondent in May 2011, shortly after completing a 6-month investigative project with Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission. She previously covered White House, national affairs, and presidential politics for National Journal magazine, reporting on the administrations of Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, as well as Senate actions during Barack Obama's first 2 years in office. She is a recipient of the Aldo Beckman Journalism Award, administered by the White House Correspondents Association, for her 2007 National Journal reporting about the Bush White House. Alexis earned a master's degree in journalism from the University of Missouri, Columbia, and her BA from New College in Sarasota, Florida. She has discussed 4 presidents, Congress, and national politics as a guest speaker and as an occasional commentator for a variety of television and radio outlets, including PBS's Washington Week program. Please welcome Alexis. Dr. John McTague is a professor in the Department of Political Science here at Towson University. He specializes in American politics with emphasis on political parties, voting behavior, and public opinion, campaigns, and the influence of religion, class, and race on politics. One of his ongoing research projects deals with the effects of personal religious affiliations of U.S. senators on the representation of their constituents. He teaches research methods and also a course on inequality that incorporates seasons of HBO series The Wire. He completed his BA at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, in 2003, and his PhD at the University of Maryland, College Park, in 2010. His research has appeared in the Legislative Studies Quarterly Quarterly, State Politics and Policy Quarterly, Political Geography, and the Oxford Handbook of Religion and American Politics. Please welcome Dr. Dunn. Joe C. Busen, who served as the Deputy National Campaign Manager for Ron Paul's 2008 Presidential Campaign Committee. He was the National Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer of the Libertarian National Committee and a senior executive in several for-profit service sector companies. He's the President and CEO of Liberty Guard, an organization which defends individual liberties. He has held senior executive leadership positions in business, community nonprofits, and political organizations. His corporate consulting practice clients are banks and manufacturers including Barclays, Mitsubishi, and Wells Fargo. Please welcome Josie. Finally, I would like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Dr. John Frisch.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. This is a really good turnout. I really appreciate that. And I want to thank everybody on the panel, some of whom traveled all the way from Washington, D.C. during rush hour to come here. That's quite a feat. So I want to thank all of them. The way the format's going to work is I'm going to start off by asking the panel members different questions. We'll be covering why third parties don't typically get covered by the news media. And that'll probably go for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for you guys, and we'll start taking questions from the audience. So with that, I'll start off with, and I'm going to go on a first-name basis here, so if that's okay with everybody. With our distinguished professor from poli-sci, I wondered if you might give us a broad overview of this subject first, and perhaps explain to everybody how the two-party system developed, how it became entrenched, and if you would, maybe a little bit on the role of third parties in American politics. And before you answer, I just wanted to, if we could keep the answers to 3 to 5 minutes, that would be good. That way everybody gets a chance to talk. And, so anyway, go ahead.
Sure. I usually get 75 minutes, so I'll see what I can do. The most important barrier keeping third parties from gaining traction in American politics is the Constitution. It's that to get elected, you are a single member elected to represent a district, and the only thing you need to do to win is get more votes than the second guy. It's not like other places where they have proportional representation, where say, I would vote for the party. If that party gets 15% of the votes, they get 15% of the seats in the legislature. That doesn't happen. If Barack Obama wins Maryland by a count of 60 to 40, Mitt Romney doesn't get 40% of Maryland's electoral college votes. Barack Obama gets all of them. And so this is a disincentive for minor parties to run because the system is set up that to gain power, it makes sense to form two major parties, to have a two-party system. So that's why we have a two-party system, is because of the way that people gain power in the first place, the way elections are set up. Two-party systems also, the goal of running for office, for most people, is to win, is to get power. And so if you're an ambitious young politician and you want to win, it makes a lot more sense, it's a lot more rational to affiliate yourself with one of the two major parties because they can provide you with a lot of resources, money, volunteers who are ready to work for you and promote your campaign, voters who have a psychological attachment that I'm a Republican, that's my team, or I'm a Democrat, that's my team. So it's a lot easier to win. If your goal is to win, it's a lot easier to win if you go with one of the two major parties. Third parties, and again, the Constitution is the biggest barrier, but third parties, for their part, often, not always, but often have a narrow issue agenda that doesn't attract a broad base of support, can sometimes be narrowly popular in one geographic region, like just the South or just the West. And when a third party is popular and promotes something that's popular, the two parties notice and they co-opt that message and they say, yeah, we agree with that. And so it sort of takes the steam out of the third party's movement. They've got this big, major party who then says, I can do that too. And so they tend to go away. So finally, I would say that from a voter's perspective, when you're voting, and I personally think this is unfair, but for a voter's perspective, people will say if you vote for the third party, you're wasting your vote. People tend to want to vote with somebody who has a chance, or vote for somebody who has a chance. A lot of these undecided voters you hear about now, they want to sort of see who's going to win and then vote for that guy. People psychologically want to be on the winning team. They don't want to vote for the losing team. And so that's another barrier that third parties have to overcome. And so why does the media not pay attention to third parties? Because they tend not to be relevant because of the Constitution and because of all of these reasons.
I'd like to then, with that sort of very good overview, start with Alexis and Charlie, if I could. And bear with me for a second. I want to set the context for this question. There have been a number of studies, over the years in political science showing that third-party presidential candidates don't get attention from the news media, and this year is obviously no different. According to an informal LexisNexis search that I did in preparation for coming in here today, the New York Times and Washington Post combined have published 3,748 news items about President Obama since August 1st, 3,576 news items about Mitt Romney. In the same period, the two newspapers have published 16 news items about Libertarian Gary Johnson, 14 about the Constitution Party candidate Virgil Goode, 13 about the Green Party candidate Jill Stein, and 1 about the Justice Party candidate Rocky Anderson. And I just looked at Politico, and the numbers are kind of similar. About 1,400 for Obama, a little over 1,300 for Romney, 14 for Johnson, 5 for Stein, 3 for Goode, and 1 for Anderson. So the question is, how does the press justify this discrepancy in coverage? One of you want to take that?
Well, let me start by just saying, I honestly don't think we have anything to defend. I mean, the justification is about what is the news value of it. What is the, to talk about Lexis search for the President of the United States, there should be a lot of coverage of the President of the United States, right? To watch the primaries in the Republican Party and to watch whomever it is who became the nominee, that's Mitt Romney, there should be a lot of coverage of that. I was just telling Charlie, who I know well from Washington, that earlier this summer I tried hard to be able to do a story about Jill and tried to line up weeks in advance of the Democratic Convention because she was going to be in Charlotte, and I couldn't get to first base with her people to do a story about her. So however much you can say, maybe it looks like we're tilting the coverage in some way, I think A, it's justified, and B, it's not like we haven't tried. That would be nice.
I guess I would echo what Alexis said. I think she made a number of points that I would agree with. I don't know that I would necessarily agree with your numbers on Politico. I think your numbers might be a little different, but probably not dramatically. But I think if you were to look at what that percentage is, and then you look at what the percentage of the popular vote is going to be at the end of the year, that's the justification, meaning somewhere in excess of 90% or maybe 95% of the popular vote is going to be cast for the two parties. That's simply the framework that we work under. That's what people are interested in. That's where they're voting. And so our news coverage is devoted in similar measure. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just a reflection of the environment in which we operate, which includes limited resources to deploy reporters. I have X amount of reporters, and there are a number of stories that we have to cover of the major candidates because that's what most people are interested in reading, and that's what we do. And the other part of what Alexis said that I think is important to note is sort of the one problem that I see that really contributes to the lack of coverage of third-party candidates is the failure to show the kind of yardsticks that we look to as political reporters and political news outlets, yardsticks for success. I mean, we know what they are in American politics. You don't have to meet all of them, but you do have to meet some of them to reach some sort of threshold of viability to the point where you would affect an election. And those yardsticks are always the same. Do you have enough money to run a campaign? Do you have enough money to run a broad-based national campaign? Do you have a level of support? Can you generate a field organization? Do you have people turning out to vote? All those different things. Do you understand the news media? Do you understand the difference between the Washington Post and Politico? Do you understand the difference between Politico and Real Clear Politics? Do you understand the difference between Politico and Real Clear Politics and Talking Points Memo? the campaigns that win and the campaigns that are most sophisticated understand all those distinctions. They understand the nature of the modern news cycle. They understand all those things, and those are the hallmarks of campaigns that make a difference. And just the last point I make would be, I would point to the Ron Paul campaign as a great example of how to capture the news media's attention. And I'm sure Joe can speak to this much better than I, but in 2008, Ron Paul did not get very much coverage at all. And I'm sure if you were a Ron Paul supporter, you were tremendously frustrated by this. Now, I know there were lots of Ron Paul supporters this year that didn't love the coverage or didn't feel that he got nearly enough. But I can tell you, we probably did, if you did a search of Politico, 10 times as many stories about Ron Paul this time as in 2008. We actually changed our coverage plan and put more senior reporter on Ron Paul once the campaign started. And it was all because he was able to show in many different ways that he was a different candidate and he was a much more broad-based candidate than he'd ever been in the past. And that really dramatically changed the landscape for him. And I think you'll see the numbers dramatically change between 2008 and 2012 when it comes to coverage of Ron Paul overall.
Alexis, I wonder if you might just build on that a little bit, because I wanted to ask under what circumstances would a third-party candidate get covered? And Charlie was sort of mentioning some of it in terms of the money raised in the organization. Do you want to build on any of that in terms of from your perspective?
Well, there's two ways of thinking about it in the context of 2012. One is something that Real Clear Politics took time to cover this year, which was the effort on the part of Americans Elect to build the infrastructure to help propel a third-party or alternative candidate forward, which we covered with a lot of sophistication and a lot of patience and spent a lot of time covering it. And if any of you know about Americans Elect, it was an effort on the part of some folks who thought that there was never going to be a better year than this year to try to take that disgruntled electorate and find the right way to propel a candidate forward with the support that they would need financially to get on the ballot, to have the kind of sophisticated system using an online system. And Americans Elect had some very wealthy backers for this and made a Herculean effort to build an online system that would attract a lot of attention from out there among the electorate and get the Americans Elect, not as a party, but as a space on the ballot to become the vessel in which this candidate could go forward. What happened was that they spent all this money building this fabulous online system in order for the electorate to be able to vote for the right alternative candidate, and developed rules in the system. There was all this money. They went out and spent all this cash to get on the ballots. And it turned out there wasn't enough support out there in the electorate to actually try to ride that vehicle forward. And Ron Paul decided to stick with the Republican Party. Lots of the folks who wanted to vote for Ron Paul, but it wouldn't fit within the rules because he wouldn't leave the GOP. So it just died. So that's one construct, is we'll cover if something new and innovative is happening in order to propel that movement forward. The second way to do it is what Charlie's talking about, which is through the candidate. Is there a voice, is there a personality, is there an individual who's stepping up and doing that and attracting enough traction? So Ron Paul, has become a very forceful phenomenon in all newsrooms because his backers are incredibly persistent. And I don't know how many Ron Paul enthusiasts are out there as opposed to on this side of the table, but they know how to yell and scream and talk to editors and send emails and supporters, right? So they get attention. And that was true of Ralph Nader. If you look back, what happened to Ralph Nader, if you look back at Ross Perot. So you can have the personality that we're interested in covering because they have built a following against all odds, or we were interested this year in trying to cover the mechanism to try to find that candidate and propel them forward.
Well, I'll direct this to Joe and Kevin, because our two political journalists raised an interesting point. Part of this is, are third-party candidates, do they even take themselves seriously, in terms of Jill Stein not responding to your request? But also, in a presidential election where you have the winner-take-all electoral college and a third party has actually no chance of winning under that kind of a system, why should the press expend, limited resources to cover these candidates?
Well, I think it's mixed. I kind of take you back to the Ron Paul campaign in '07. There was a series, as you recall, in the primaries of the presidential debates. In an early one, there were 11 candidates, and it was decided that Ron Paul was not invited, that he would not be allowed to debate. And they had people like Fred Thompson and some other big-time guys that went nowhere on that election. And we decided at that very moment to actually hold our own event. And it was kind of a seminal moment for our campaign at the Hy-Vee Center. And it turned out that this was a national debate covered on national television. We ended up having a bigger event next door. And that was kind of a moment where kind of the campaign emerged. And we did begin to get more and more coverage. We did many things, but another seminal point was the day we raised $6.2 million online. And that was the national record, so to speak, at that time. And that was the time when Wolf Blitzer called up and said, we're all going to be spending a lot of time with you going forward because $6.2 million was raised. And I think this speaks to your point of the chicken or the egg, and which comes first, the viability or the coverage. The coverage continued for Ron Paul, and then he predicted a number of things, a financial catastrophe, so to speak, in 08 and 09, and that came to pass. And I think his stock kind of went up, and from that point on, he really became well thought of. So I think part of what I think is absolutely true. You do need to be viable as a campaign, as a candidate. You need to be credible. You need to raise the money. But I see an opportunity also for the solution, as it were, to be presented in addition to the candidate. Just take, the war on drugs, and the two parties have very similar positions. I think one area that the media could be involved in is to present an alternative position, kind of what I would call the non-interventionist point of view, as a solution in a whole array of foreign policy and domestic policy. But there's no question that parties and candidates need to be viable. They need to raise the money to attract the attention from the media.
The question is, why should they cover third parties? And the reason is because third parties throughout our history have been the place where new ideas that have transformed the country have gotten into the political system. And this has been true over and over and over and over again, and it'd be true today if the media was covering what third parties were saying. But unfortunately, media is very close to the two parties. In fact, they participate in the charade debates. They call the National Commission on Presidential Debates. It's actually a national corporation controlled by the two parties and big business interests. I think it's an embarrassment for the media to agree to limit those debates to two people when there are two other people who are on enough ballots to get elected. And you want to question viability. Getting on the ballot in this country is very hard. The two parties have made it almost impossible. These third-party campaigns spend 3/4 of their whole time running getting on the ballot because it's a very difficult process. Unless you're a hedge fund group like the group you mentioned, the Wall Street group that has lots of money to pour into it and pay people to gather signatures. If you're doing a volunteer basis, it's very difficult. And that's a shame because throughout our history we've seen change come from third parties. Go back to the history of slavery. 1840s, 1850s, there were two parties, the Whigs and the Democrats. The Democrats were plantation owners. They didn't want to discuss any slavery. The Whigs were northern industrialists. They were profiting from cheap cotton. They didn't want to discuss any slavery. So the two parties agreed, we're not going to discuss abolition of slavery. That's not on the table in Congress. There was a 100-year-plus effort to end slavery. Finally, in the 1840s and 50s, they decided to run for electoral offices. These candidates never won an election, but they changed the direction of the country because they put into play the issue of abolition. You go to the 1880s, 1890s, 1880s, 1890s, when there was a massive depression where farmers were losing their farms to bankers and mortgage takings. And what developed was a populist movement and a populist party. And they gave farmers the powers, they strengthened farmers so they actually had rights. They also began the union movement. They also helped to do in the urban areas, helped build the union movement. They never got elected either, the president. But they changed the debate. You want to look at where the New Deal came from? It came from the progressives, the Bull Moose, the socialists, who never won an election, never got over 10%. And they raised the issues that should have been covered. Today, for example, how many people here have ever heard of the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Any reporters? The Trans-Pacific Partnership is the largest trade agreement in history. It's being negotiated right now. President Obama goes to the convention. He says, I'm going to end outsourcing. He's putting outsourcing on steroids with this. This is a negotiation that's a global corporate coup. And it's never been reported in the media. Never. It's amazing how it's like a secret. In fact, they're trying to negotiate in secret. Luckily, activists have gotten involved and have broken through and have started to get at least some activists knowing it exists. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is a negotiation between the United States, Australia, and very poor Pacific Rim countries like Vietnam, Peru. Vietnam, the median income is $1,000 a year. Peru, it's $3,000. And what this agreement is going to do is give incredible power to corporations. It's a secret even from Congress. Members of Congress can't see it. The media can't see it. You go ask the White House. You cover the White House. Ask them, what are your proposals to the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Can you share those with us? You'll get no answer. Can you show us what's been agreed to? You get no answer. Obama's saying one thing and doing the other, and the media's not reporting it. So I guarantee the Green Party knows about this. They're talking about it. But the Trans-Pacific Partnership is going to change the whole nature of trade. Because with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, they have an unusual thing in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a docking provision where countries can join it, but they have to agree to what's already been negotiated. So after the United States bullies these small countries with its ally Australia to accept an incredible corporate power, and I said it's a secret, by the way, it's not a secret from corporations. Obama has 600 corporate advisors who see the agreement in live time and can suggest to his trade representative, change this phrase here, change that phrase here. So the corporations are part of this negotiation. And why is it a global corporate coup? I'll just give you one provision that's been leaked. Let's say a country like Vietnam. Leaked to activists. A group called Trade Justice. I'm glad to give you more information. You go to flushthetpp.org. That's our website on it. Flush the toilet paper plus tpp.org. Anyway, I'll be quick on this. I don't want to take too much time. I'll just tell you one provision. It allows corporations to sue governments. Let's say a government passes an environmental law or a labor law or a consumer law, and that labor law is going to cost the corporation $10 million over 5 years. The corporation sues the government and says, you have to pay us $10 million because that's going to be lost profits for us, that labor law you just passed. And it goes to a special trade council, the judges. You know who the judges are? They're corporate lawyers on leave from their corporation, deciding whether or not the corporation gets the money, then they go back to their corporation. That's the court system they're setting up. This is a global corporate coup happening on our nose. The corporate media is not reporting it. They're too much in bed with the two parties, not challenging them. And that's because and the failure to cover third parties is going to mean we are going to be inward. All we do is a red-blue horse race. That's what the media covers. Red-blue horse race. Who's ahead? Who's ahead? Which state? Give me a break.
Well, do you guys want to respond to that before I?
Yeah, Charlie, do you want to respond to that?
I'm happy to. I think there's actually a couple points where Kevin and I are on the same page. I agree that the role of third parties is really important, especially when you look at the record levels of disillusionment that we have with the two major parties. They're deeply, profoundly screwed up, and it's reflected in a myriad of ways through our politics. But having said that, I think, again, if we're spending all our time covering the two parties, it's because the market speaks very loudly. That's what our readers